Walking alone in the desert can be ferocious, but anybody who's walked across the Midwestern United States in November is completely out of their mind. The days are too hot to sweat, even though you wouldn't believe so by how easily the sand sticks to you. And the nights are so cold you need two fires, one to stop the hungry beasts and one to balance the warmth around you. Some might wonder why a traveler doesn't simply walk at night, since movement keeps the body temperature up. He would only smile and nod his head. He'd walk the same path longer than he can remember. He'd say the sun is soothing as the stale air is thrown across the thick sky and the tumbleweeds stroll by. Besides, without the campfires, there's nothing between you and the uncontrollable nocturnal hunters. Looking up towards the sun, he knew it was going on 4 p.m., and if he didn't stop now to set up camp, it wouldn't be done by nightfall. He lowered the brown sack from his shoulder, tipped it up so all the dry twigs he had been collecting all day fell to the still burning sand. Of all his many tricks he's picked up over the years, this was by far his favorite. He loved the solitary walk, the air, the heat, all the well, as night fell, so did he. As the sun rose the following morning, his eyes caught a glare from a small structure 3 or 4 hours away, exactly where he knew it would be. The diner was some random road with a few semi-trucks stopped for either gas or refreshments, usually coffee. Not all the eyes turned as our friend walked up and opened the door. He took off his dark gray bowler hat, took the hat off past the same neck scarf around his neck and placed it on his forearm under the short-sleeved collar button-up burgundy shirt. Almost red, you would say. As he looked around, he made his way to the stool closest to the pies. He dropped his sack to his side and placed his hat on the same. "What can I get for you, Santa?" A pleasant woman's voice strolled across the counters towards the jolly man, who tilted his head so he could look through the glasses, as his hand scratched the too short to be called a beard white fuzz on his face, and smiled. "I'll just have some blueberry pie if I could, with a scoop of vanilla on top." "Ice cream, would you like..." Oh, she put the notepad and pen back in her apron. "Should I warm that pie up for you, Shug?" He turned to the window, checking the shadows on the ground before turning back. "I think I can manage." As she turned, he asked, "Is there a newspaper about?" "You just passed it when you came in by the front door, hon." "Perfect." He adjusted his glasses and made his way to the door, where he bent down and found the date, November 21st. A good day indeed. As he returned to the stool, the waitress had already got back and was placing the scoop on top. "Would you like a cup of coffee with that, sweetie?" No, thank you. That stuff puts me to sleep." He didn't rush his meal, but he surely didn't nurse it either, every now and then glancing at the shadows outside the window. No one paid it any mind. As he finished the last bite, a shout slammed open the door. "Please, somebody call an ambulance." A young man was carrying his pregnant wife, who was panting and covered in sweat. "Please, my wife's having a baby. Somebody get help." A wanderer leaped up from his seat. Get some warm water and a clean cloth. He helped place the woman on the ground and put his sack under her head. The husband was frantic. He put his hand on the husband's shoulder and said, "Let me use your t-shirt as a sheet." He looked up at the stranger, still in shock, and shook it off. "Okay, yeah," and took off his shirt, placing his wife on his wife. "Are you a doctor?" "Once." The busy man was too busy. They handed him the bin of hot water. He started never drawing attention. It only took an hour or two before the baby cried its first sound. Our hero washed his hands in the restroom, put his scarf back on, and headed towards the counter where he paid his bill. "Thank you, Beth. That really was delicious. I love the pies here." Everyone was in shock by the events that had just happened. Their day had truly twisted. Well, he picked up his stuff, dusted off his brown sack, and kicked his baby blue shoes that were too big for his feet. "Thank you, Beth. The pie was delicious," and walked out the door. Everyone was exhausted. "Hey, Beth, who was that guy?" the cook asked. She shook her head and shrugged her shoulders. "I don't know. Never seen him before. It was his first time in here. He only got here right before you." "Then how did he know your name?" Elizabeth seemed puzzled at the question. "He probably just read my name tag." "You're not wearing your name tag." Her face dropped and looked towards the empty door, then back at the chef. Time slowed seconds to hours before she spoke up in the bland question. "Did you guys see where he went?" 3 days later, the Los Angeles skyline came into view, and he reminisced over the past 24 hours, knowing the days fly by too fast. Shaking off the edginess, he sat up and looked towards the stars. 4 hours till dawn, huh? Standing up, putting out the fires, and picked up his goods. He looked towards the city. Within the blink of an eye later, he was looking down from the high-rise onto the streets of the homeless. They were busy, walking about, minding their own business. Miles and miles of tents lined the sidewalks. He leaped from one building to the next and found Mr. Marvin Cantor, the sweetest old man in the world. He's been homeless for 22 out of his 56 years of life. 5 years ago he got sick and never really able to recover. A man walked up, sat down Indian style next to him. Cantor never said a word. He pulled out a stone bowl and a stone press from his brown sack. He explained where he found these herbs. Then we pulled them out, showing them to Cantor, letting them see them before he started crushing them. He let them know what they look like, what they do, what they are. He lit a fire, pulled out his water jug, and started tea. Mr. Cantor watched the stranger and listened to his words. all before the tea was done. A crowd formed around them, and so he brought out more pots, over and over again, telling about the herbs. He did this for the next 6 days, when sitting on the rooftop of 1,000 miles of homeless streets, looking down over the 1,000 miles of homeless streets. You know, I watch you do this every year. If you really wanted to help, you probably one of the only people who could. So why do you only give them medicine? Oh, hello, Bernard and Rudolph. Nice to see you too. It's not our place. It's like our letter laws. God says they have to help each other, or they'll never learn. Bernard got off Rudolph's back and walked towards the ledge next to Santa, watching their people below quietly. Coming out of the daze, Rudolph spoke up. 5 minutes to December. Right. Coming to realize they had a lot of work to do. You and Bernard head to the north and get things ready. Handing Bernard his sack. I'll head south and get our support. Rudolph and Bernard were gone in the blink of an eye, and Santa thought to himself, hoping the numbers will be lower next year. I'll be back next year. By 12 a.m. December 1st, Bernard and Rudolph arrived, landing in front of the 100-mile wide pine forest that circles the Arctic Circle. The ice wind blew through the 5-story high trees, creating a desolate rubbing sound. The waving with the wind in the dark, losing all shape and form, darker than the sky around it, dark enough to scare any right-minded mortal from ever thinking of trespassing. If the cold wasn't warning enough, Bernard had been there so many times he didn't need Rudolph to light his path anymore. He knew exactly where he was going, and he raised his head to clap. A snowball shot through the air, smashing him in the back. He was wearing a huge knee-low white fur jacket with hoodie and red fur Santa pants, white cuff and all. Before he could turn around, 200 more snowballs crashed into him, transforming him into a big pile of snow. Wiping the snow from his patronizing eyes, he blinked, shook it off with a roll. He was a machine, throwing hundreds of snowballs in all directions, so fast he was a blur in the dim light. I'm over 1,700 years old. No one's been born who's better snowballer than me. Never missing a beat. All the elves tried, but they only found air, until finally one shouted coming out of the trees, "We surrender, we forfeit!" One after another, 1,100 in all followed his call. With their arms in the air, Bernard dusted his shoulder, acting like a big shot. Now, get ready. Be at the North Pole City by sunrise. Then turned to Rudolph. I'm pretty sure Donner's wondering where his second-in-command is by now. Right. I'd better get to the Glen of Evergreen. Bernard watched him go, threw up his hood and Santa's sack over his shoulders, and began the long hike to the Stalagmite Ice Crystal Valley. Before the sunrise the following morning, Santa arrived deep in the Brazilian rainforest. His beard had fully filled out and was hanging down along his long green jacket. His red and white striped vertical pants blue in the distance as he leaped from branch to branch until he arrived at a clearing where a large stone circle was with an engraving on top. Two bells on the back of his boots, one under a reef, and the sleigh bells on his left arm jingled as he landed, jingled and jangled, really through all the trees. He stood in the moonlight, and you could see the blue leather straps with white snowflakes engraved on them over the tops of his brown gloves and brown boots. He had a wreath crown on his head with 4 lit candles on top, and one in each corner, and he reached in his pocket and pulled out a tiny wooden flute and began to play. The song carried all the way around the woods, the forest, and within moments dozens of tiny blue water fairies emerged from the tree line. Hello, jingling their sounds. The 6-inch fairies bowed to Father Christmas, and in turn he bowed back. Come, my friends, we have many to find. The 5 other fairies were in 5 other places all around the world, all hidden with stone platforms with different engravings, just like this one was. They all followed. They found the homes of the fire fairies and metal fairies, who were nearly identical to the 6-inch water fairies, except for their color and attributes. At each clearing, by each of the homes, he called them with the flute. The wood fairy sprites stood 5 feet tall. The light spirits were merely 2 inches and completely without form. Then last but not least, the 1-inch plastic widgets that has 8 legs even though they never touch the ground. The legs spin as they fly. They turn to the right when they move forward and to the left when they move backwards in reverse. Well, my friends, placing the flute in his pocket for the last time, are we ready to make Christmas? Yay! They all hooted and as the sun began to shine. All around the world, children were waking up, jumping on their parents' bed, pleading, wake up, we need to decorate the tree, we have to decorate the house, come on, wake up. The parents were eager, but more tired than the young bodies of their children. Some make kids shaking their nerves for days before they're finally standing in front of the bare green pine in their house. So many years, everyone with the idea of what Christmas is. Should it be the same as last year? Should it be different this year? What is Christmas? What isn't Christmas? Christmas is what it was. Christmas is what it always will be. The magic is what kids know, not what companies try to invoke. This doesn't matter to Bernard at all. He doesn't care when they decorate the tree or if they do it all. Right now, all that matters is that it's December 2nd, and he's finally arrived under the enormous ice crests that hide the North Pole City satellite from satellites or anything else that passes by. Even the shape itself muffles the sounds so that nobody can hear the factory if they were walking by it. He set down the sack and opened the top, revealing a pile of snow globes. I love this part, he thought to himself. He reached down, picked up the first one, and peeked inside. Inside was a small reindeer pen. Holding up to his eye, the blue sky began to shine through, and he moved the globe like a telescope, finding where it looked the best on the countryside behind it. There, perfect. He brought up his other hand and tapped the globe with his index finger. The snow globe popped, inside. The building became full size where his eye placed it. Good, perfect, and reached for another. The satellite refill globe, the toy factory globe, the main house and kitchen globe, one after another, popped and unleashed until the once barren countryside was now filled with the enormous North Pole city. Then Bernard reached inside the sack and pulled out the last globe. He used his knee to hoister up Santa's sack and popped the last globe on the inside. The bag shined for a moment, then became fresh and clean, and had golden stars appear all over it. The elves began wandering over the hillside behind him, ready to work. Back at the homes of the children, their nerves ain't getting better. They sit in the twilight, governing their homes, where to place what lights where. They decorate their homes with a nativity scene, with wreaths, with lights and tinsel. They put Santa on the roof, sometimes hanging on it, sometimes trapped in fake chimneys. They filled their homes with decorative snowmen and reindeers and fake sleighs until the whole neighborhood is united under the peace of goodwill towards men and goodwill towards all. Saint Nick sent his helper to Bernard and headed to the Evergreen Glen. There, Donner, Rudolph, and Jack Frost worked the young reindeers fiercely, preparing them in case one of the 8 namespaces need to be filled. Many people don't know this, that the names are part of the magic, and when one of Santa's reindeers do choose to retire, they get replaced by the most qualified and most like the one being replaced, and take that name. It doesn't happen too often, and the animals in the Evergreen Glen are immortal. Even the ones who retire only do so the young ones can partake. Donner runs them through the routines as Rudolph preps them and motivates them in line. Then, group by group, they launch into the air and fly as far as they can as Jack Frost blows blizzard strength winds at them. The reindeer soar this way and that way, trying to keep the straight fight, trying to keep the strongest straight line they can, fighting the wind and not be pushed back. Ho 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 ho! Saint Nick laughed, watching all the reindeers' eyes light up as he began to cheer. They all began to cheer and hop around, saying hi to Santa. Hi, Santa. Hello. Hi, Santa. Why, hi, Santa. Happy holidays. And you too, my dear friend Donner. How's everyone? Donner walked beside Chris and called to the ones who want to try out. the most. Fall in. The reindeers, tall and small, jumped in line single file, hoping to show off to the boss. All their nerves were wild. Ready? Donner called. Yes, sir. Go, Santa called before Donner even finished pronouncing the O. The reindeers bucked into the air. Its speed was so fast, I think its launch velocity was the only thing working. And sure enough, the poor deer leg began to shudder, brain in the air like somebody pushed it on in water and it can't swim, like it slid across the ice and had no traction, all the way to the snow ground below. Now I know what you're thinking. Why is there snow on the ground of Evergreen Glen? Well, that's because it'd be foolish to let the reindeers play on grass. They would crash. They would hurt themselves. And the reason it's called the Glen is because of the immortal animals. They walk around like it's springtime and the temperature's low. It's just no actual green. If you want green at the North Pole, go find the Easter Bunny. He lives right around the corner, and his actually does stay green all year. The poor guy sat up for what felt like forever when Kris Kringle's voice finally boomed above him. He looked up and seen the brown and black and white stripes slacks he was wearing. Brown, black, and white striped slacks held up by white suspenders over a black t-shirt with a red hoodie. Santa stretched hoodie, not beanie. Santa stretched his suspenders and knelt down. Did I make you so nervous you stopped thinking? He bashfully bowed his head in shame. Hey, Santa said, don't be embarrassed. If you're embarrassed, you're putting too much thought into this. Learning is by doing over and over again. And what I've learned over the years is that if you have to show off, you don't really have it. Do it for more than it's fun. Do it because you love it. Santa stood up with him and placed his hand on his shoulder. I've been doing this for a long time. Yeah, remember, the best never need to show off. Well, Donner, Rudolph, Jack, you guys, it's getting late, and you know how the missus gets if I don't spend some time with her during Christmas. And so I gotta go. Bye, everyone. Bye, guys and girls. When Santa finally arrived at the Great Wall door in North Pole City, he pulled out his pocket watch. Only he could make heads or tails of. Oh my, I'm late. Putting it back into his pocket, he knelt down and picked up some snow and flung it into the air. In front of him, the snow began to sparkle red and silver, and 300 to 600 spots began to spiral and flash, creating so many mall Santas. And let me tell you, not one looked like the real thing. The secret is, they're not supposed to. Okay, troops, Santa taking a very drill sergeant attitude, with a green metal helmet and equestrian whip stick. Your job is to tell on all the bad kids. I want to know who's mean, who's rude, who cuts in line. yells at anyone, pulls your fake beards, anything. All of you know their names by appearance, right? Right, they agreed. Good. When the mall closes, each night I want you to head straight to the post office in your areas. Remember, don't be seen. Travel on the rooftops. And awaken all the letters addressed to the North Pole City. Okay? Yes, sir. Good. Good luck and Godspeed. Malls this time of year, in a word, are insane. Almost every mall around the world slam-packed with people. Buyers, sellers, thieves, all crammed together, buying everything. And not just everything, as many as they can. The children write out their notes, thinking of everything they've ever seen and ever heard about, wanting everything and more. Let me tell you, kids, lucky we don't give coal anymore, since coal helps warm some houses, meaning it was a kindness, which was the only kindness the bad kids ever gave for their families. The malls are filled with anger, speed, fighting, all hiding behind the joy of those who lived all the years without hope. Then as the darkness falls and the crowds quiet, the Santas begin their covert path to the post office. Straight up the walls, leaping and landing as light as a feather, never making a sound. And they land on the post office roof. They began to sing the song of the flute. All the letters began to glow a golden shine and lift into the air. They pass like ghosts through the ceiling, and the fake Santas waved them on, hoping them a happy trip to the North Pole City. Golden twinkles sparkle off the letters' wake, like as hundreds of them join together, finding each other on the way home. Okay, everyone, you know how this works. Elves, you work in 3-shift systems. The spirits, you all work in 2, jumping between the toys and the packaging areas. As we all know, Mrs. Claus gets first view to inspect any new products and the last say on after the wrapping. Bernard stood before a room of Christmas, and as the letters began to pile through the stained glass reef over the entrance of the toy factory, they began to sort themselves. 3/4 of them landed out the door next to the opening. The others went to the corresponding departments of the first item on their list. Huge lines of letters floating in single file lines. In front of the line opens, revealing what items needed. Bernard manages every department: electronics, action figures and dolls, bikes, sports, games, and stocking fillers. The spirits push out as much of the product as the elf needs to build. The fire fairies melt the plastic and the metals. The light fairies put the tinsel and glimmer and glitter and twists and decorating on all of the ribbons and paper, Christmas wrapping paper. The elves all wear light brown aprons with white stripes with holly embroidered on the pockets in front. The pockets in front are magic, giving the elves every tool he or she needs. The elves themselves come in 3 sizes and 3 heights. 6 inches, 1 foot, or 2 foot, thin, medium, or heavy. Some wore sky blue suits with pink scarves, or green suits with gold scarves, and red and white striped socks, or light purple with blue and gray scarves and pink socks. Some wear the typical red with white puffs and green socks. Some have light pink with yellow scarves with blue socks, or even the rare white with orange scarves. They all, boy or girl, have white puff balls on the tops of their shoes and the ends of their hats. Mrs. Claus walked around instructing the elves on minor changes. We don't want any of our toys winding up on the island of misfit toys, do we? As she smiled and lit candles around the world. The spirits kept pumping out ingredients. The elves fiddled in their lines, carving the pieces into what they needed. As the toys followed the letters that they came from to the next department or next area to be finished. As songs and classic holiday movies play in the background. The factory was so busy, you would almost think it was a colorful static television. Too fast to know what's actually going on. Judy and Mrs. Claus made their way around the speedy elves and spirits, offering hot cocoa with marshmallows to anyone who needs it. We also have an assortment of treats on the cart when you're ready. The entire North Pole city holds a fuzzy hue for those who are looking from the distance. Mrs. Claus and Judy made their way to the kitchen located in the main house, where its own set of elves had already began producing the Christmas candies for the stockings. Don't forget, Mrs. Claus shouted. We almost forgot the oranges and apples last year. The elves smiled and joked with each other as they worked. It's always something. Every year something slips under the radar. We should make our own letters. An elf spoke up. And then they could do the work for us. Stop it, Mrs. Claus laughed with them as her belly shook. Right then, snowflakes and stars flew in the opening door. Hello, everybody. Merry Christmas. They turned and seen Frosty the Snowman, waving as he entered the bustling kitchen. Hello, Frosty. Hey, Frosty. All the elves followed Mrs. Claus, who added, How was the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade? I heard you were featured as the last float this year. Oh, it was great. Everyone was so happy, and the float was decorated with huge snowflakes and dancing candy cane people. Oh my, that's fantastic. Oh yeah, it was so much fun. I'm glad Santa decided to make them find other Christmas spirits to celebrate the season. Who knows, maybe Rudolph will do it next year. Yes, she smiled, and the smell of chocolate and candy cane swirled in the air. That would be just perfect. Santa does do a lot this time of year. Then the stranger's look appeared on his face. I know I'm new around here, but I have noticed that I don't often see Santa running around here. Is he so fast, like the other elves? that I just can't see him? Oh, she giggled, like a bowl full of jelly. No, my dear, although he is a wily old elf. No, you see, it's pretty complicated. Every year around this time, he makes a number of trips to the human world. He looks through his list, finding who holds and needs the Christmas spirit the most. Sometimes he reveals himself to those who fight for him. Sometimes he stands as a bell ringer, or even holds a shift as a mall Santa. You know where all Christmas is held the truest. Peace on earth and goodwill to all. Wow, that's cool. Well, yeah, you should watch some of the shows playing in the toy factory. Humans have a habit of needing to tell their story so much that they end up in movies and on TV. Ever since Santa, no, you are able to go into the toy factory and not melt, right? Yeah, ever since Santa put the magic snowflake button on my hat. People who see Papa always have to show off. That's what happens. Most end up on... I hear he even has a time distorter to make special visits that actually allow people to think allow people to deliver the presents for him on Christmas Eve. But that's Noel for you. The magic of the 24th. Frosty had stars in his eyes. What an amazing thing to do. Mrs. Claus smiled and placed her hand on his icy shoulder. Look at me, distracting you. I'm sure you came here for some other reason than to listen to me ramble on about our good old Saint Nick. I could listen about Christmas forever, Mrs. Claus. Oh, now I don't know if that's okay. You have all that'll do you and your little friends a whole lot of injustice. You and your little human friends are more important. They're what make Christmas special. And they're around all year. Frosty seemed puzzled by this, but she was right. He couldn't just stand around. The reindeers needed him. Oh, Mrs. Claus, sounded startled. I've come here for the reindeer supper. Do you know if it's ready? And before she could speak, an elf in light purple clothing, blue scarf and pink socks, interrupted. I've been waiting for you, as he patted the front runner of a line of polar bears on the side. The bears carried huge, light brown bundles strapped to their backs, full of food for the reindeers. Perfect, Mrs. Claus said happily. And when you're done, would you head to the woods and collect the elf food? I'm sure the first shift will be ending soon. Of course, in a deep, noble voice, the polar bear rumbled deeply. We'll be sure to move lively. I surely don't want our friends to go without. Posh, posh, Mrs. Claus fluttered her hand. I tell them every time to get clean, to play in the snow, and relax before they eat and sleep. It's why Papa and Bernard split them up into 3 shifts to begin with, so they will have no excuse. He giggled and he rumbled. See you soon, Mrs. Claus. We'll have fresh fish waiting for you when you get back, shouted Judy, as the line of polar bears walked out the door towards the reindeer pen. Goodbye, Mrs. Claus, said Frosty, and he waved goodbye. Merry Christmas, Frosty. Time passes as she thought it would, and soon enough the sound of the play strolled into her ears. Mrs. Claus walked over to the second-floor window, opening it for fresh air, and to watch her little ones run about. They soared down their sleds, down the pearly white snow, arms spread in the air. They rolled and built snowmen and played with snowballs. They sat with piles of snowballs all around them, hoping to shield themselves and to shield their heads. They rolled around in the snow and built snow angels. Mrs. Claus thought they sounded like children playing, and decided, looking up at the sky, that it was about time for her to make her annual trip too. Mrs. Claus liked to find one kid a year who desperately wanted to help someone, but for some reason wasn't able to, totally against his or her will. Red, white, and silver sparkles swept out the second-story window until out of sight. The elves made their way to the shower, then to the dining room, singing whatever Christmas song came to mind. They ate, clicked their mugs, laughed, and sang. It was a blessing for them to be here. Some have even discussed in bed. Some even have discussed in bed before the lights went out that they must have been humans in the past life, the kind of human who needs Christmas all year. Why else would they be so out of the body happy about building all this every December for the past 1700 years? They turned to see a huge double door swing open, and the shadowed image walked through the doors. They knew it was him. "Hi, Santa." "Hey, Santa. Hi, Santa. Hello, Santa," they all greeted. He was the only one who wouldn't go through the much, much smaller elf doors placed inside the huge wooden ones, like dog doors, but with doorknobs, not flaps. He walked up to the long, beautifully carved table and sat down. All the elves were silent as Judy poured his cup. You see, a thought had been making his way around the elves' woods this year, and began discriminating their understandings. So, like any rational being, they decided to ask, "Santa, seeing all the eyes were on him, why don't all the good children get toys?" Santa smiled and took a sip of coffee. "That is a very important question, my friend. And well, the truth is that God said people are supposed to help those who can't help themselves. You see, if we gave presents to everyone, no one might realize that it's their responsibility. Now you see, we're bound by the same rules as all God's children. Humans have a bad habit of turning things around to suit them. We don't have that luxury." "That's right," one interrupted. "Christmas is Jesus' birthday. It's pretty bad to go against him after we stole his day. Actually, my little friend, Christmas is the beginning of the winter solstice, not a religious holiday. Or even more important, God's birthday. I think the humans try to shine more lights on God by adding them to it. But that's a very dangerous thing to do. You see, we're not allowed to change a word in the Bible, or we get in trouble. Jesus was closer to being born in September. Now, God did say to praise him in all things. We do. But I don't believe he meant as if they perform it. But then, Doesn't that mean we can't give anyone presents? But doesn't that mean we can't give anyone presents? Doesn't God say we can't covet? Well, no. We're supposed to ask him for everything. That's not immoral. We just can't worship anything over anyone or anyone over him. God built us. Everything we could make. So everything we could make, everything we need. Even made all the minerals to reproduce themselves so we can have enough for everyone. Unfortunately, people think they have the right to sell it just because they built something to make themselves. This isn't what God meant by making us kings. I honestly never understood how that began, since the first human was labeled king in the beginning after Adam and Eve ate the fruit of knowledge of good and evil, as they were built from the clay. The Bible says we ain't allowed to eat of the good and evil, and being built from the clay is bad. Those born in heaven are from heaven. But man was given domain over all things. He said we couldn't eat it after showing it to them. Eve didn't disguise it or put it in something, so he defined God's word. So when he knew what it was. Why were we made kings? Why were we made kings? I believe it's because, like God says, he puts the bad things here so we can learn who we are. The Bible says Jesus couldn't sin because he would never do that kind of stuff. He was a servant to us. He was a servant to us all, so we walked the gospel for him. You see, it's the same reason so many letters end up in the no-go file. The letters were meant to ask me for presents for their families because they acted like children of God all year. Not to ask for gifts for themselves, for the families, because they couldn't make them for them. We do God's work letting him rest. We're not drawing attention away from the Lord or creating idols. We give in moderation to those who don't need to be taught to do good because they just are. And a good kid who would rather be jealous because he doesn't get a gift than somebody less fortunate is just selfish and isn't as good as he thinks he is. The kid who knows the letters meant you give. I finally understand why there's so many angel decorations. It's because angels follow people who fear God, and Christmas has become really bad in the human world. Not bad, Santa said, finishing his cup, just misunderstood. It's not about gifts. It's to remind us before the dark, cold winter months that we hold the light of the Lord and strive for peace on earth and goodwill toward man, to goodwill towards all, for all those years to come, as God intended for us. Because why make bad so we can heal it? Now Santa said, I don't want this going to your heads. Be warned. God warned us about being show-offs. We are simply in a position to help. Now it's getting later, and all better get to some sleep. The second shift will be getting off pretty soon. The elves were not detoured by what Santa said. It felt good to know they weren't making God mad, and finally understood everything. People must learn to stand for what's right despite what others claim. That's why we give the naughty kids coal or other things the family needs so they can see what life's all about as God intended. Amen. 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 As they walked down the halls, as they entered the 2 bedrooms of the main house, they were very tired, yawned and stretched, scratching their heads, taking off their hats. The bedroom was bigger than yours, unless you're the size of an elf. That is a room that holds more than 100 or 1,000 beds. Bunk beds, 30 beds high. Elves were climbing everywhere. They all got in their beds and faded asleep, some even saying their prayers, now feeling reborn in the spirit. Thanks God. Santa, on the other hand, had more work to do. He sleeps very little this month, making sure everything's caught up. He made his way to the toy factory looking for Bernard. He went through the electronics department, where the 1-foot-tall, 3-legged spider-looking thing walked up the furnace. The fire fairies just lit. Yeah, the closest elf shouted. I need 5 bits of copper on this one, as he finished looking at the floating, glowing letter. The metal spear can produce 3 different types of metal that exit through one of the 3 holes in the center mount. Then 5 drops of copper rolled out into the pot above the fire. The elf that was wearing a green suit with gold scarf and red and white striped socks pulled the hammer and chisel back in his light brown apron, and as the heat shined off, the pot tipped and he poured the metal into the cast he had just got done building. Santa never stopped walking. He was almost floored by the little 6-armed plastic maker spirit that was quickly out of sight in all the commotion. He walked past the 5-foot-tall woodmaker spirit who watched the elf put his hand together and show how big of a piece of wood he needed. The wood spirit mimicked this and pulled a big log of wood into existence, the size that it's needed, and matched the elf's. It handed it to the elf who wore the sky blue suit, pink scarf, and candy cane socks. Said, thanks, putting a huge saw out of the light brown apron. Santa went upstairs and through the doors, landing on the refilled satellite, where little white rabbits and penguins were escorting the glowing letters to their projected areas, followed by the letters were followed by fully packaged and wrapped gifts. The little animals walked to Bernard, which found the satellite they were headed straight towards. Or if they were headed to Santa's sack. Santa watched as they sorted themselves, leaving the animals to head back to the factory and the letters to turn into sparkles and put themselves in the little leather booklet Bernard was holding. Is everything on schedule? And accounted for, Papa. We're almost done filling the last satellite. We'll be ready to go on schedule. Perfect. Any news of the weather? A minor ice flurry in the U.S. heartland, and it goes all the way through the east of Russia and Mongolia. Nothing we can't deal with in our sleep. Good, good, and laughing, both hands on his belly. I better go see the missus. You know how she gets if I don't spend some time with her this month. Well, you have been known to. Hey, that's enough of that, he said, and he turned, almost stepping on an innocent penguin, who unfortunately had to stop so fast that the letters and gifts crashed into its back. Oh, my, I'm so horrible, kneeling down, putting his hand on his shoulder. Are you okay? I'm so sorry. Some gifts backed up, giving the penguin space. The other animals never missed a beat. Passing, the bunnies just hopped right over, and the penguin slid along the sides. Later that night, Mr. and Mrs. Claus sat on the roof of the main house, looking up at the moon and stars. The walls of the factory were lined with garland and lights, followed by stripes of pine and strings of bells. The echoes of dozens of Christmas songs and shows blurred out of the conveyor belts that held the pieces of the unfinished toys. They were lined with elves that were building all the individual pieces to add to the toys being constructed. The toy factory holds dozens of assembly lines, each with 6 or 7 little elves. They happily worked, humming their songs, playing nearby, or watching Christmas TV, as their hands busily make the little happy parts. Christmas trees and stockings filled the blank spaces, and nobody noticed the wiry rat hiding behind the ornament, peeking out of the pine tree branches. The rat's eye thinned and sneered and turned around and headed back to the heart of the tree. I found it, he remarked in a low voice. We must inform the king. They scurried down the tree trunk to the floor, and then closely followed behind the elves in transit along the edges of the walls. They went from one to the next, all the way to the 5-foot-tall toy castle, unseen, high in the castle ledge. Rats quietly sat. High on the castle ledge, rats quietly sat as they could, watching the elves below. Their eyes were wired, finding any toy that had fallen, waiting it to be double sure no elf would bend down to pick it up. Sir, the tree rats finally reached the top. We found him. The Nutcracker is on the other side of the stocking stuffer department, past the painting and packaging tables. The Rat King snapped his clawed finger, creating a pair of tiny golden binoculars. A rat shot from behind the assembly line, snatching a toy doll with its mouth in a single move, shot in behind the toy castle. It arrived to find dozens of rats snapping their fingers, creating metal armor and an assortment of weaponry, swords, spears, nets. They turned to their king, who now had a feather center mask on his crown and was now wearing a metal mask. Charge! They darted out of the side along the walls, following the wall around the factory, never being seen by any elf, coming to a stop at the corner near the painting table. He gestured to his lieutenant with a wave in his hand without ever saying a word. The lieutenant clicked his fingers, and a mirror on a stick appeared in his hand. He held it around the corner, peeking a view, his eyes focused hard. The elves seemed to never stop. Then, with the trees and tables becoming one flashing swarm, that's when his eyes caught him. The cursed prince, forced to live in the wooden body of a nutcracker. He turned back to the king and nodded. The Rat King shook his head forward, and the line of rats scurried by the edge of the walls, when out of nowhere a trumpet from high above blared over the numerous scattered sounds. A line of nutcracker drummers began drumming. The others aimed their shotguns. Toys rolled out the cannons, all to the command of the prince. Fire! The cannons boomed, firing walnuts at the rats, hitting them in the head. The rats sneered, scurrying to cover each other from the shotgun shells and other things being hauled at them. They did everything in their magical arsenal to gain footing. Two created floating pirate ships as dozens of rats leaped on, somehow going undetected as it reached high over the crowds below. Cannons lined the sides of the ships. They began firing small Christmas ornaments at the nutcrackers. They dropped tinsel out the back of the boat, trying to wrap them up, but the drummers only pulled their swords and sliced them free. This was the eternal dance of the toy factory. All of the elves and spirits kept working, not paying a smidge of notice. No one ever even noticed. The next morning they awoke with the smell of Christmas in the air. December 24th, Papa. Yep, it is. As he stretched, turning his feet off the bed near his slippers, fumbling his hands around and reaching for his glasses on the end table, causing him to round out his back with another stretch. So have you, Mrs. Claus was already wearing her furry red dress with white hair bonnet, thought about which suit you wanted to wear tonight? She opened the closet door and ran her hand across the arms of the many jackets. Click, click, she heard and turned to him. Will you ever give that up, Papa? Santa was holding a flame to an old corncob pipe. Come on now, Mama. I only do it on Christmas Eve morning. Taking a puff. That has to be less than moderation, I would think. Speaking heavily as he blew the smoke out and fixed his glasses and smiled. I suppose we'll have to try on a few of them till we find out which one feels right for the season. And Mrs. Claus, with her head tilted to the side, smiled as they both turned to shake side to side. Birds cheeped overhead, soaring around the North Pole. Santa walked out of the main house wearing gray sweatpants, with a gray shirt with red short sleeves, and red sneakers, with the tennis ball-sized white puff on top. He sat there next to Miss Claus in the rocking chair on the first floor porch, and pulled out the naughty list and a pen from his red beanie. In a good mood. Have you made sure Elmer was in a good mood this year? Oh, he laughed, putting his other hand on hers. I'll be sure to never let that happen again. I've actually given him a vacation to Paris this year. Really? Sounding surprised? Sure, all expenses paid, and for a full week at that. The least we can do for someone who's in charge of collecting all the information from every human's angel and devil consciousness. You're a good man, Papa. I've seen those angels and devils. They are hard to deal with. You understand why Elmer gets so grumpy. Maybe, but it did stir the problem in my head. They all deserve a vacation. We'll have to think about it before next December. She nodded in agreement. But I have been to the forest during the middle of the year, before the ice and the winds take over. The elves live the most beautiful lives. Remember, they are the ones who carved all the wood here, and they love it so much. Meanwhile, Frosty was harnessing the reindeer. And giving them their magic feed corn. Their pen was huge, as big as an airplane warehouse hangar. They tapped their hooves, felt the reins and bells. Yeah, they thought, this feels right. Frosty smiled and watched as one by one they ran up the walls and upside down onto the roof and began running laps. From the roof to the walls, to the wall to the ground, from the ground to the walls, and they flew side by side each other in single file. They moved so fast, Frosty began to swing and get dizzy. Luckily, Jack Frost's voice came in behind him. Hello, everybody. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Jack. Have you finished setting up the winter schedule? Yep, just finished. I figured to take it easy on summer this year. The heat didn't affect the rain so much. Looking towards the reindeers, they're pretty special, ain't they? Yeah, but I can't spend all too long looking at them. When opening up, they actually run in single file now, so it don't hurt my head. The sun set past the horizon. Santa put up his red suspenders. The suspenders held up his big fluffy red pants. He knelt down and tied his combat boots, pulling the white fur cusp over the boots. He stood up, put on the big bulky red jacket, and zipped it up. On the left shoulder was a reindeer racing logo patch, and on the right forearm was a grapefruit-sized snowbell embroidered patch on it. He put his thick black leather belt around his waist as Mrs. Claus was dusting off the huge embroidered wreath on his back. I do love when you choose this one. The white Christmas Santa suit is my favorite. He smiled. The red in his cheeks shined bright. He picked up the handful of candy canes and put them in his pocket. These were very special candy canes. They were everlasting. They will never run out of taste, and they will never wear down to nothing. He has one of each flavor. He put them in his pocket as the woo woo from the train came in the distance. Oh my, we're running late. He took another pair of suspenders, put them over his bulky jacket. These were lined with 4 bells, jingle bells on each, to make sure stuff was extra tight, and he took her by the hand, and they walked out the door. "Oh, your hat!" "Oh, my." He turned and ran back inside. "And my black gloves. My, oh, my," putting them on, and putting the green with gold stars, then grabbing the matching green for his boots, grabbing his hat, seeing if anything else was missing. "I will lose my head if it wasn't for you, Mama." Right then, Frosty was walking out with leading the reindeers, as dozens of elves were putting the last pieces into Santa's sack in the back of the sleigh. They walked up, and Santa reached into the sleigh, pulling out a blue sheath lined with silver white snowflakes on it. A sheath is a sword holder, but without the sword. He put it in his belt and kissed Mrs. Claus. Right as the golden sparkles along the ground were becoming metal tracks, and the woo-woo train came into view. The kids were ecstatic, unable to talk, unable to imagine what they were really seeing. As Santa waved, got in his sleigh, and started speaking the words that their hearts nearly died. "On Dasher, on Dancer, on Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen. Dash away, dash away all." They flew into the air, snowflakes flying off the back as if they were twinkles. The kids reached their heads out the windows, lost in the moment. Mrs. Claus loved this time of year. It was her favorite. A whole train of children, thinking they were unworthy to believe in this stuff anymore. They flew away out of distance as the satellites began to launch. The kids had already fallen back in their seats. The train had already gone. The tracks had already bursted back into gold sparkles and disappeared from existence. Once again, it was over, and they would have to wait a whole nother year for it to happen again. It's good to let people believe who didn't, to let people see that the magic is real and it holds in all of us. Mrs. Claus turned to thank the mineral spirits. "Can we expect you back next year?" The spirits wiggled and moved happily, affirming their joy for the season, before bursting into ghost forms and headed back to their homes all over the globe. The moon was full and high in the sky. There was a beautiful cool breeze in the air. The perfect night to start Christmas morning. Bernard flipped open his little brown book and guided them to the first town. They dropped down to just under the tree line, so that anybody who was still up or looking up for Santa would never see him pass by. He would be disguised by the home's Christmas lights and the swaying of the trees. They would never see the sleigh down below. The sound of carolers caught Santa's ear, and he began humming. Bernard sat on Rudolph and stayed 3 houses ahead of the sleigh and its 8 tiny reindeer. He holds the book over each house, allowing him to see inside and see if everybody's asleep or just faking it. Whenever he finds someone awake, he makes Rudolph flash his nose over the house in question, alerting Santa to skip this one until later. As Noel's reindeers reach an approved rooftop, they transform into red and white silver twinkles, leaving only Santa holding a sack running across the roofs. Homes with no chimneys end up magically having them, as they appear open, in and out in a flash. So fast, too fast to see, unless of course you were Santa. The chimneys burst open, big enough for a huge man to walk freely. As he whipped open the sack, dozens of elves shoot out, some holding presents, 3 wearing backpacks, 1 with candy, 1 with stocking stuffers, and 1 with coal and other assorted home improvement products. The third one, not needed as often, snatches the cookies and milk for all the elves to enjoy. All the elves return back into the sack as he jumps back in the disappearing, shrinking chimney fireplace. If you look inside the sack, you'll realize that it's an entire shipping factory with dozens of elves moving the assembly line, preparing the runners for the next home. As the last runners return, Santa puts his finger on his nose, and up the chimney he goes. Runs across so fast, it's hard to keep up even talking about it. Leaping from one roof to the next, in, elves out, grab candy, or grab cookies and milk, back in, finger on nose, to the next house. When he got done with each line and needed to jump across the street, he leaps off wholeheartedly, and the red and white sprinkles that stay in front of him this whole time becomes a reindeer, and he leaps off and lands at the other one and into the next chimney. He jumps each street as fast as he jumps each town, as fast as he jumps each roof, all in the same blink, until Bernard steps in and says it's time to head back and see if the kids are asleep yet. They head down and finish the town. They come to realize that an elf peeks his head out of the sack. "Santa, we only got 3 more houses left. We need a refill." He finishes the line and jumps high into the sky. The full sleigh and 8 reindeers appear below him, shooting straight up, as Bernard and Rudolph stay on the roof holding their place. They go so fast, some would say he's not even real. He shoots high up past the refill satellite, taps it on the side, U-turns the sleigh, and shoots down. As the bottom of the refill satellite opens and all the toys start falling out, the sleigh and 8 reindeers disappear, leaving Santa falling to the earth like a skydiver, shooting straight down. He opens the sack, scoops them all up, brings out the sleigh and reindeers, and flies to the next town. It's truly an amazing thing watching him follow the red, white, and silver sprinkles over the houses. to the reindeer, to the sleigh, to the reindeer, to the sleigh. Truly is the Christmas spirit. By the end of each town, as he scrolls out of sight, Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night. At the end of the night, before the sun comes up the horizon in the North Pole, they head in towards North Pole City. He flips the reins, and all of the reindeers come undone. All the reindeers thank him. They love Christmas so much and waited their whole lives to be allowed to take the names of the ones who originally they disappeared. Rudolph pulled back as Bernard plopped into the sleigh next to him. Thanks, Rudolph. You were amazing. And disappeared. Well, that's another one down, Papa. Another one down. It was such a good moment. Bernard burst into green and white with gold sprinkles and disappeared, having work to do, taking the sack with him. As with a flip from the sleigh, a single horse appeared, pulling the sleigh. As the red and white sparkles flew in next to the seat next to Santa, Mrs. Claus appeared, kissing him on the cheek, and he handed her a candy cane. Merry Christmas.